I just include this picture. This woman, her name's Traci. She's one of the preeminent ultramarathoners in the United States. I was looking at her track record, so to speak, and in several races, 50 miles to 100-mile races, she was not just first for her gender, but she was also first overall. So that means that she was beating the guys. So I'd just like to propose that maybe there is a potentiality that our differences are minor enough that maybe men and women really are equally good, just in slightly different ways. Just like maybe men are faster than women, but maybe women have better endurance. Because this doesn't just apply to the Leadville Marathon either. This applies to ultramarathons in general. Women usually do really well compared to men. Okay, so I'm proposing the idea that we're both good at different things, including like maybe emotions, working with children, but maybe just in slightly different ways. Okay. So moving on from this idea that, again, reiterating from Monday, that people are weakly dimorphic, that they don't have a ton of really extreme differences, like some of those animals that we saw where the female fish was enormous and the male was like 2 centimeters long or something. We're not that different. We're more similar than we are different. Okay? But then there's other kinds of inequality that we haven't quite talked about. And one of them is this idea of global inequality. So what we're finding around the world is that women, when compared to men, generally are suffering from higher levels of poverty, and they are used as a lot of cheap labor in different countries. China being a good example of this. A lot of women also suffer much higher rates of abuse and rape. I don't know if any of you remember, but there was an article that came out last year that was talking about the number of South African men who have admitted to raping a woman. Does anybody know how many that was? Say that again?
It was a really high number. It was the majority, by far and away, the majority of the population.
Yeah, let me see. Make sure I get this right. It was 1 in 4 men. So not quite as high as that, but about a quarter of men in South Africa have admitted to raping a woman. But that's just people that have admitted it. So wouldn't it stand to reason that maybe there are some people that women have admitted it? Yeah.
Is it the African Americans or the African? The black side or white side?
Didn't distinguish.
Because I know, like, I would suspect that in just because of the population.
Okay, so he's asking if this applies to the black South Africans, the white South Africans. The picture that they have in the article is of a black South African, but they didn't specify that in the article. Okay. Part of the problem that goes into looking at rates of abuse and rates of rape and these different kinds of things is that it's really hard to know what the actual rates are because we don't have a really good census or a really good set of numbers for a lot of the lesser developed countries. So part of this is guesswork, really, because we don't even know how many people are out there. They're saying that they're missing, I think, over 1 million women that they can't seem to account for, or they're not sure if they are there, or they've moved, or something. So we got to remember that any kind of, when we're looking at global inequalities, it's really hard to say definitively how much or what kind of inequality there is, simply because nobody's been in contact with a lot of these different groups of people. Okay. So the other problem that a lot of women globally suffer is this idea of higher mortality rates. Okay, so when you have lower levels of education, like a lot of women do, you don't have access to health, you have fewer resources, especially if you're in areas where it's very patriarchal in the sense that men kind of inherit all the wealth, they inherit all the land. Women don't have a lot. So generally speaking, women are more likely to suffer from issues such as malnutrition and poverty and things of this nature. They're saying that 2/3 of all women, or excuse me, 2/3 of all people who are illiterate in the United States, or excuse me, in the world, 2/3 of all women, of all people in the world are women that are illiterate. Okay, does that make sense? What I told you just talking about. 2/3 of all literate people in the world that are illiterate are women.
So 2/3 of all the world's illiterate people are women?
Yes. Sorry, I'm kind of pushing that one. You said it correctly. Does everyone understand it now? Okay. So, explanations of inequality. There's lots and lots and lots of different explanations of inequality, and we're probably not going to be able to cover quite all of them in a significant level of detail. However, this is being in an intro class, so we want to give kind of an overview of a lot of these different ideas. One of the first ideas is this idea that a lot of inequality, male-female inequality, is institutional. So, institutional being that certain institutions are really kind of based or formed around different gender roles. Does anybody think of some examples of gendered institutions? Yeah. So you're saying like the medical profession?
Well, the nursing half is mostly women, but like the doctor.
So he's saying that the nursing half is mostly women, the doctor half is mostly men. Yeah.
Would the Masons be one?
The Masons?
Masons?
I would consider that a male-dominated institution. Right.
What are you saying,
Churches are an institution. Who are the prophets of the popes? Pastors, typically men. So you're right. Another really, really important and sort of obvious example is the military. Again, women weren't even allowed into the military for a long time, and women still can't hold a lot of positions in the military. And the military is still to this day very much dominated by men. Okay. So going along with this idea of institutional gender stratification, institutional gender divisions, is also the idea of patriarchy. Can somebody kind of give me a little bit more of an explanation of what patriarchy is? She says it's like being the head of the house. Basically, yeah. So what has happened with patriarchy historically is that what she said is correct. Men have been the head of the household. This is also kind of back in the day when, as we discussed on Monday, where women were seen as property, that they were essentially owned by men. But also going along with this idea of patriarchy is the idea that wealth and any kind of inheritance generally falls through the male bloodline. Okay, so a lot of these different things have transitioned simply from the standard family to how we govern kind of our society today. So another idea going along with this are these ideas of sexism and discrimination. So sexism is pretty obvious. Can somebody give me a quick definition of sexism?
One sex is better.
Say that again?
Where one sex, you believe one sex is better than the other.
He's saying that basically that one sex is better than the other. And you're more or less right. This is generally going to apply to how men don't see women as good as them, correct? That's where a lot of people say, oh, you're sexist, aren't you? Men don't say that, no, you're not. So that's how this definition has traditionally been held, or at least for a long time, is this idea that men are inherently better than women. And this has led to, of course, discrimination. Discrimination in the sense that women couldn't go to the military, they couldn't have certain kinds of jobs, that they were kind of pigeonholed into certain things, like being secretaries or nurses or elementary education teachers, this kind of idea. So those are just a couple of the really broad, general overviews of explanations of inequality, but there are more specific explanations as well. I want to talk about explanations of economic inequality. First of these being this idea of human capital. When we discussed the differences between men and women in terms of economics, one of the important things that I think a lot of you think about too when you think of these differences is how things such as education and age and prior experience have played into this. Because if you're a woman that's maybe younger, doesn't have a lot of as much education, or maybe you took some time off to have a baby, that's going to affect your level of experience, and it's going to affect your level of human capital. How competitive you are going to be bringing your particular individual traits to a particular job market. You see? So a lot of the argument is that women go into certain jobs with certain levels of education, that's going to count